Evening, everybody. Glad you're here tonight. Good to see everybody that's watching online as well. Everyone take your Bibles and be with me tonight in Acts chapter 27. Acts chapter 27. We'll be going to Rome tonight, and I've never been to Rome, but Paul has been to Rome. If we do a little review here, if you remember everything that has led up to this, Paul was arrested in Jerusalem. We can call that arrested, although he was never formally charged. There were some things that were done that were not legal. Paul was attacked in Jerusalem by a Jewish mob who falsely accused him. And so when he was arrested in Jerusalem, God's purpose was for him to serve as a witness there. And oh, did he serve as a witness. We get actually about 6 chapters worth in the book of Acts of the Apostle Paul witnessing to people like the Sanhedrin court in Jerusalem. He appeared before the Sanhedrin. He preached Jesus Christ to them. Then he was led away from Jerusalem. Give Commander Claudius Lysias some credit for doing the right thing. And he got Paul out of that Jewish mob. He escorted him with a host of Roman soldiers, and he took him to Caesarea Philippi, where he appeared before the governor of Judea named Felix. And Paul preached the gospel to him, so much so that it says that Felix feared. He feared. And then he said, when I have a more convenient time, I will hear further of you. Well, then Felix was not a good man, not by any stretch of the imagination. He was let go by the Roman government. Paul spent 2 years in prison while he was in Jerusalem and Caesarea. And he was in prison, and Felix was replaced by another governor named Festus. And Festus also heard from the Apostle Paul, and he preached the gospel to Festus. And Festus was a little more fair-minded. He was a little more fair with the Apostle Paul, treated him well, but he was a politician. He played politics. He wanted to please the Jews. He was more interested in his position as a governor than he was his position in eternal life, and or in eternity, I should say. And he basically dismissed Paul. And Festus said, why don't you go on down to Jerusalem and appear to the people who would accuse you there? And Paul knew what was going to happen. It had already been revealed that if the Roman officials would send Paul back to Jerusalem, there would be a group of Jews lying in wait to kill him. And Paul knew what was going to happen. And he said, no, I appeal my case to Caesar. And that's why Paul's going to Rome tonight, is because he had appealed his case to Caesar. And remember that the Lord said, just as you witnessed to me in Jerusalem, you shall also witness to me in Rome. And so Paul was a prisoner in Jerusalem, and he witnessed for the Lord. Paul will be a prisoner in Rome, and he will have a great ministry while he is a prisoner in Rome. We'll learn more about that later. And then he appeared before King Agrippa. Now, Agrippa was a governor as well, but he worked out a situation where he could be called king. And he was the governor of the northern region, Syria. And Galilee was in that region as well. So King Agrippa was well aware. It's interesting that both Felix, Festus, and King Agrippa knew about the way. They knew about Jesus Christ. They knew about Christ followers. So I guess when they stood before the Lord in judgment, they were without excuse. And so we have King Agrippa listening to Paul's case. Paul lays out a fantastic presentation of the gospel, his own testimony. And King Agrippa says, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. However you interpret that, what is being said there is, Paul, you made a persuasive case to be a Christian, and yet King Agrippa being of the Herod dynasty anyway, turned his nose away and died a lost man for all we know. And so Paul appealed his case to Caesar, and to Caesar you shall go. So we start in chapter 27, and we are on the way to Rome. Here we go, chapter 27, verse 1. And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, well, that would be Rome, wouldn't it? They delivered Paul and some of the prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. I don't know a lot about all that, other than he was would you call him a sergeant or would you call him a captain? I'm not a big military guy, but he was a leader of a band of 100. And that's probably a sergeant. That would probably be a sergeant. So this is what he was. Centurions really serve interesting, there's a whole other study about all the centurions in Scripture and how that many of those centurions were saved. But that's another story. But so he entered the ship of the, I practiced this, Adramyttium, and we put to sail, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. And then he just kind of gives his, I can hop, skip, and jump now. Aristarchus was with him. Also, Luke was with him. Look at verse 3. And the next day, Luke is involved in that. We landed in Sidon. Julius treated Paul kindly. He gave him liberty to go to his friends and to receive care. I don't know that Paul was anyway sick or anything like that. It probably was. They served him a fine meal. I'm sure they served him fried chicken. What else do you feed a preacher? And so they served him a meal and took care of him. He took a bath. I mean, it could have been 2 years since the Apostle Paul had taken a bath. So they treated him very, very kindly. I'll look at my notes and see if I need to say anything. Slide number 4. Yeah, you're with me. Thank you. Under the guardianship of Centurion Julius, Paul heads to Rome. Approximately 2,250 miles from Caesarea to Rome. Luke and Aristarchus is with him. From Caesarea, they traveled north to Sidon, and Paul received care from his friends there. And from there, they travel to the shelter of Cyprus Island. This was just the normal ship travel. But it does say in verse 4, because the winds were contrary. Foreshadowing. All of you good Wednesday night people, you know what happens in Acts chapter 27. You know of the shipwreck. But when they began, this is late in the year. This is September, October. This is the time of the year when you don't travel by sea unless you have to. This is why Paul said, I will spend the winter there. Paul's usually traveling from here to here, there to there to here, but in the winter, you just don't travel. Because in the Mediterranean Sea, that's when hurricanes happen. Do you know that the Mediterranean Sea is very similar to our Gulf of Mexico? It's a warm, shallow sea with lots of many islands. And because it has a lot of warm water, and those cold streams come out of the Atlantic and hits that warm water, it stirs up a hurricane. And it's probably what Paul and his ship that he was on got caught up in. And so we know a little bit about that. I did show you a map. Next one. Yeah. I showed you a map of the, a lot of this is just hop, skip, and jump. And so you kind of see, you can see that pretty good. So up the coast of Cyprus, north to the right-hand side of Cyprus, and you see how they make their way over to Crete. So that's a good visual to show you the way that he went. They changed ships at Myra. This is verse 6. He found an Alexandrian ship that would be from Alexandria, Africa. And they sailed to Italy, and he put them on board. There were 276 passengers. Somewhere that's there. I promise it's there. I just can't find it right now. And with difficulty, verses 7 and 8, he says, we sailed slowly many days. The winds were contrary. They were blowing in the wrong direction. And so they, with difficulty, off this Cnidus, the winds not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete, off of Salome. So you see that on the map. Go back to the map just for a moment, please. So you see how they stayed very close to the land, and then they knew that if they're going to make it onto Italy, they've got to make that shift. So they said it's better for us to try for Crete than to try all the way over to Achaia. So this is just the typicals. And it says, with difficulty, we came to a place called Fairhaven. Now that's just on the other side. Now, the winds are blowing out of the northeast. So they're on the better side of the island of Crete. And now when much time had been spent, and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over. What's that mean? This is the fast that occurred before the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement is in September, late September. So this is the time of the year. And so Paul advised them. Now, as I've already leaked this a little bit. So I want to ask you all the questions as we're going through this. Why is this chapter in the Bible? What is this chapter all about? It's just an odd little chapter in the Bible. There's not a big fish like in Jonah. It's just a seafaring voyage and all the troubles that they had. One thing I think you'll see is that before this is over, Paul is the captain of the ship. He basically takes over the leadership of the ship. And there's another really important lesson here, is how God cared for His man. And how that God blessed the people around him because he was a part of this ship travel. I don't know. I can't say the what ifs, but if Paul would not have been on that ship, what would have happened? I can't say that. I don't know that. But I know that the Lord delivered that ship because He had promised the Apostle Paul he would make it to Rome. All right, so Paul said, look, men, I perceive that this voyage will end in disaster. And if you'll notice that word perceive, it is a word that means, I'm on slide 7, you're with me, aren't you? Yep. To know by experience. Paul know anything about ship travel? Well, he had already written in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25, that he had been shipwrecked 3 times. So yeah, Paul knew a lot about ship travel. And he says, I know from experience that this is going to end in a disaster. I have been there and I have done that. And he says, much loss, not only of cargo and ship, but also of our lives. The centurion didn't listen. Verse 11. The centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman. Now those were the people that steered the ship. Those were the experts. Those were the people that knew how to do things. I've learned by experience, just because you are a helmsman doesn't know you know how to travel and steer a ship. And the owner of the ship, then by the things that Paul spoke. Verse 12. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also, if by means they could reach Phoenix. Can I get you to show me the map one more time? I need a slide over here. Can we get a slide over here? Put the map over there. There's Phoenix. So their idea was, well, this was very much out in the open, but if they could get over toward Phoenix, then they could get in a safer harbor over in that area. and it says, and harbor, Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there. That's where they needed to stay for the winter. 3 months. And you just don't get in a hurry when you're traveling like that. When the south wind blew softly, things are changing. We got a south wind now. Things are better. Supposing that they had obtained their desire, they put out to sea and they sailed close by Crete. They stayed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose called the Euroclydon. I've got a note about that somewhere. Yes, in slide number 8. The Euroclydon literally means from the northeast. A nor'easter. Anybody ever seen the movie Perfect Storm? Y'all seen that movie? Wow. That was an emotional movie. But they got caught in that nor'easter, and that ship didn't survive. So, anyway, and for weeks, they were tossed to and fro. It's blowing from the northeast, pushing them to the southwest. It says in verse 15, so when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, what did we do? Drop the sails. Let her ride. Can't fight it. Keep the sails up. We're going to break this ship apart. So let her ride. And running under the shelter of the island of Claudia, I'm sorry, Vicki. Map again. I want these people to know where we are. You see Claudia just off of Crete. Okay, so that's where we are. We secured the skiff with difficulty. Where are the skiff? Those are the rescue boats. So we tied them tight. And when they all had taken it on board, or it says when they all had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship. Take cables around the ship, tie them tight, so that the ship doesn't come apart. And fearing lest they should run aground on the citrus sands. Does my map show the citrus sands? It doesn't. Can we do this? Can we go to slide number 10? Thank you. Citrus major. There we are. What that is an area off the coast of Africa. And it is full of shallow seas, sandbars. Now, all that I can compare that to is in my little bitty boat with my little bitty outboard motor. One time, I put my boat in at, what's that golf course? Off of Burns Park. I put my boat in at Burns Park. I'd never really run that area of the Arkansas River. This is where 430 Bridge goes across. So I'm just flying down through there, and I got my depth finder going, and I'm in 20 foot of water. And then I hit around the 430 Bridge, I find some 80-foot water. And I'm not lying. 80-foot water right in that area. And before I know it, I'm in 2 foot of water. That'll happen to you on the Arkansas River, won't it, Glenn? And I shut everything down. And I thought, wow. I mean, just in a very short stretch, I went from 80 foot to 2 foot. That's the way this sea is. So my little boat, I mean, it'll float in 1 foot of water. But the boat they were in, it wasn't a huge boat, but it was a big enough boat that if you stick it in the sand in the midst of a storm and you're on it, make sure that you got a wheel, because you're a dead man. All right, so this is what's going on. So they let her ride. They're being pushed southwest, and they were afraid that they were going to hit the citrus sands. And they struck sail. So all right, we got to try something. So they put the sails back up. They put the sails back up, and so we were driven. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. I don't really know why. I'm not that smart. Maybe y'all know why. But something about lighting the ship, maybe they were thinking, if we do come across some shallow seas, at least we won't stick the ship. On the third day, now we've been 3 days in this, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. We had seen neither the sun nor the stars for many days. How do you sail? They didn't have radar. How do you sail? The sun tells you where the north or east and the west is. The stars tell you where the north and the south are. They saw neither for many days. They didn't know where they were. And no small tempest beat on us, and all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. We're done. We're done. Now, this is a Wednesday night. I don't try to preach as much, but I'll preach a little bit. You ever been to that place? I mean, it's really hard to imagine. But have you ever been to that place where you thought, I'm dead. I'm a dead man. This is it. I am not going to survive this. Now, this is where Paul and his partners were. Verse 21, and after a long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and he said, right in the middle of this storm, men, you should have listened to me. Paul, he was not a man of tact. I mean, he had a lot of it because he never used it. You should have listened to me, but not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. But on the other hand, I urge you to take heart. He speaks very confidently. See, he says, for there will be no loss of life among you. Bold statement in the midst of a storm, and everybody has given up. But this ship's a goner. It's not going to survive. How did he know that? For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. Another promise. The promise hasn't changed. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. What did I say? The only reason that this ship survived is a man named Paul. And the reason that the passengers on this ship survived is because of a man named Paul. God has given you all of those who sail with you. So, Paul says to them, cheer up. It's going to be okay. I wish that every time that I heard from the Lord in His Word, that I would take heart and cheer up and say, everything's going to be okay. Paul, when God speaks, he says, for I believe God, that it will be just as it was told me. However, well, now, there's a catch. And this is the catch. It's going to be a rough landing. We must run aground on a certain island. That's all that's said there. Now, I think I ought to look at my notes. Let's see. 27. Okay. No, I'm good. Slide number 9 is where I'm at now. Now, when the 14th night, they'd been doing this for 14 nights. Whew. That's tough. The only thing I can compare it to is being in a plane and knowing you're going to crash. I ain't never been there, obviously. But that's basically what would be comparable to our day. As we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, one of them, slide 10 maybe. Adriatic Sea is actually the sea between Italy and Greece. So I'm assuming that they're calling this southern area the Adriatic Sea. I don't think they went that far north. They were somewhere in this very open water, around and around and around. About midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near to some land. Sailors just know that. Maybe they were doing the Mark Twain, dropping down the line, pulling it back up. Maybe they were noticing. I'm sure they may have been doing that because they were afraid they were going to hit that shallow sand. But they recognized that they were close to land. And they took soundings, well, there it is, and found it to be 20 fathoms, and I don't know how deep that is. And when they had gone a little further, they took soundings again and found it to be 15. So we're getting shallower and shallower. Then, fearing lest they should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors. Not sure that's a great idea. Yeah, that's going to be rough on that ship, isn't it? I have another story about not my boat, but my dad's boat. We were fishing below a dam, like say the Murray Locking Dam, and we were fishing for catfish with poles. And it was pretty swift water. And so we didn't have an anchor because we weren't very wealthy, but we had 8-inch concrete blocks for obvious reasons. And so my dad took an 8-inch concrete block, tied a rope to it, threw it out, and it was tied to the front. And we just about sank that boat. As soon as that concrete block took hold, that boat started doing this number, and my dad cut the line. So that don't sound like a great idea to me. But anyway, they dropped the anchors and prayed for the day to come. There's just a lot of people, that's the only time they pray is when they're in a situation like this. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, we've got an abandoned ship situation here. They let down the skiffs into the sea under pretense of putting out the anchors from the prow. We've got to go put out some more anchors. What were they doing? They were hightailing it out of there, weren't they? But Paul was no dummy. He says in verse 31, he said to the centurion and the soldiers, he says, unless these men stay on the ship, you cannot be saved. You will not live. And I would think that was, I don't know that I would take a skiff is about the size of maybe 10 foot, 12 foot long. It would be like the difference between being in Glenn's boat or being in a kayak. I think I'll take my chances in Glenn's boat. But Paul said, you're going to die if you do that. Well, there's another reason, because the Lord had said, I'm going to save your life, Paul, and all those who sail with you. But there's no other promises beyond that. Then the soldiers, they cut the ropes of the skiff and let it fall. Who's the captain now? Who's making the calls now? So they cut the skiffs and let them loose. And as the day was about to dawn, Paul implored them, hey, take some food. Today's the 14th day and you hadn't eaten yet. They had, I'm assuming, did they sleep during this time? How long had they been up? Therefore, I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. Big promise. And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when they had broken it, he began to eat. Paul began to eat in front of them. Eating, it was always, it is, if we're scared, the last thing we want to do is eat. And so, but in that day, it was very much so that when you sat down to eat, all was okay. All was good. Can you see Paul witnessing here? Can you see Paul's great witness? This is witnessing in action, isn't it? This is Paul showing the calm and the calmness that God gives in the midst of the storm. Now, I hope that I can be that kind of witness for people in the midst of the storms that we are in our country and in our life. Let us be a calm. Let us be a calming influence on the people who are around us. Let our trust in God show. Verse 36. Then they all were encouraged and took food for themselves. There's the 276 persons. That's what I was looking for. Verse 37, in all we were 276 persons on the ship. And so when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. So they're getting rid of the cargo. And when it was day, they did not recognize the land. But they observed a bay with a beach onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. Calm seas. If we can beach this ship, it won't be an easy landing, but we'll be close to land. We can all jump out and swim that far at least, and we'll survive. And they let go of the anchors and left them into the sea. And meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for the shore. Let's do it. But striking a place where two seas met, I don't know where that's at, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. And the soldiers planned to kill the prisoners. If the prisoners escape, the soldier must pay the penalty of the prisoner. And it was probably death. But what happened? This centurion, so impressed by the Apostle Paul, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that those who could swim go for it and get to land. And the rest, some on the board and some on boards and some on parts of the ship. So all of you guys, ladies, if you're in good shape, go swim. All the rest of you, there's going to be lots of boards in this ocean because this ship is falling apart. Get aboard and float in. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. A couple of pictures. There is a place at the island of Malta called St. Paul's Bay. I've never been there. One of those places, if y'all send me on a vacation one year, I'll go to Malta. It's a beautiful island. A beautiful island. Only by pictures, that's all I know. It is a, for us, it's a, I'm getting old. Not the Gulf of Mexico, but we're all Bahamas and Jamaica and all those islands are. Caribbean. Thank you. It is a Caribbean. Malta is a vacation island for Europeans. That's where they go. It's very Italian. They would have all that good Italian food, beautiful beaches, crystal blue seas, and there is a place called St. Paul's Bay. And, this has been a long time ago, But Malta is a very Christianized place. Now, there's a lot of Catholics, but if you rewind the historical tape far enough, in the origins of that, there was some truth there. And it is forever then. Paul's influence on the island of Malta changed that culture. Let's say the gospel influence. God's influence on those people changed that culture forever. Another one, next, yes, that is a picture of St. Paul's Bay. I can't tell you if that's exactly where it was that Paul landed or not. We'll do some in chapter 28. We'll see how far we get. I just saw I got about 10 minutes. So what we know, so when they escaped, they came to the island of Malta. The natives, that's interesting that it uses that term. These were Aborigines type people. They were not cultured, as we might say. They were not Westerners nor Easterners. They were island people. And they were a little bit primitive. That would not be the best way to say it. But they showed Paul and the travelers unusual kindness. They weren't the headhunters like you see on Gilligan's Island. They were not those people. They were kind, and they treated them kindly. They made a fire for them because they were swimming out of the sea. And imagine they were very cold, because this is not July or August like we are in right now. This is September, October, and the seas were cool, and I'm sure they were cold. And so they kindled a fire for them, made us welcome, and because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks, what happened? A copperhead bit him. I don't know if it's a copperhead or not. I don't know what kind of snakes are on Malta. I don't know. I know a friend of mine just recently got bit by a cottonmouth, and I saw his hand. It didn't look very good. But nothing happened to Paul. When the natives saw the snake fall off of Paul's hand, or actually it was hanging on his hand, well, then they said, "Did you see the superstition here? No doubt this man is a murderer whom, though he has escaped the sea, yet justice does allow him to live." So the gods, pagan, the gods are obviously not letting Paul go, even though he escaped a potential shipwreck. Well, this snake got him. Paul shook it off into the fire. He killed a snake? Paul must not have been an animal lover. And he suffered no harm. However, they were expecting that he would swell up and die. But after they'd looked for a long time and saw no harm coming to him, well, they changed their mind. Then they said he was a god. This is not the first time Paul had been called a god. You know, it doesn't really tell us a whole lot of what Paul said to these people. I wish there was more. But I want to think that Paul rehearsed a lot of his speeches, preaching, sermons that he had made previously to people who called him a god. He said, "We're not gods, we're men like you, but we know God." In that region there was an estate of a leading citizen of the island. His name was Publius, who received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. Paul and his entourage. I don't know about the centurion, the soldiers, and all those, but Paul and Publius, who was the leading citizen of this area, and it happened that his father, Publius' father, he laid sick with a fever and dysentery, and Paul went in to him, prayed with him, he laid his hands on him, and he healed him. And so when this was done, the rest of those on the island who had diseases, they came and were healed. And they also honored us in many ways, and when we departed, they provided such things as were necessary. And it's probably a good place to stop because they're about to leave the island of Malta, and this gives me a segue into Paul's ministry in Rome. Paul was not planning on being a prisoner in Rome and sitting around and watching reruns of I Love Lucy. Paul ministered. He wrote 4 Bible books. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. But we got a whole lot more to go as we look at the Apostle Paul and his ministry in Rome. He came as a prisoner, but when he arrived, he ministered in Rome. Go to slide number 19. I'll just give you a little bit of information. Paul arrived, now this comes from Warren Wiersbe's commentary. Paul arrived in Rome right on time. If he had arrived earlier, he would have been caught up in the upheaval in Rome over the Jews and Christians, which led to their being expelled from the city. Remember Aquila and Priscilla? Acts chapter 18. They had lived in Rome and got kicked out by Claudius. So that was not the right time for Paul to arrive in Rome. When Paul arrived, this upheaval had calmed down, and Paul spent 2 years ministering in Rome and writing the prison epistles of Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. If Paul would have arrived later, he would have been immediately caught up in the persecution of Jews and Christians under Emperor Nero, not allowing him to have a 2-year ministry in Rome. That's longer than any of his one journeys. Longer than his first, longer than his second, longer than his third. He had 2 years ministering in Rome. Now, history tells us, and Wiersbe writes, it is true that Paul was killed in this later persecution under Emperor Nero. And that's what history tells us, but that's jumping way too far ahead. We're not there yet. Thank you for being here tonight. I hope that you enjoyed Acts chapter 27. There is not a wasted word in Scripture, and it has a message for us, and I hope that we all learned that when God says, I will take care of you, we can believe it. And in the midst of a storm, no matter how raging it is, we can be a calming presence among a fearful people. All right. Make a few announcements and then we'll move into prayer request. For those who have agreed to serve as guards, thank you. We need you on Sundays and Wednesdays. And there is a rotation list posted on the bulletin board. Take your cell phone out there and take a picture of it and put your week in your calendar, and thank you for helping us serve in that much needed area. So our security guards, a rotation schedule is on the bulletin board. All the other rest of the announcements are pretty much the same. Just be in mind of and prayerfully that hopefully in September, the first Sunday in September, we can resume Sunday school, going to our individual classes. There's some information about those classes out there on the table where our Sunday school and devotional books are. So go ahead and pick those up. And to our online audience, God bless you. Thank you for being here tonight. Send me some feedback. Let me know what's going on in your life. I'd love to hear from you. And if you have prayer concerns that you want us to publish to the church, we'll be certain to do so. And send that to my email and let me know, or Dee's email, and we'll be sure to pray with you and let the church know of your prayer concerns. God bless you and good night.